All right, good morning. Thank you for coming. The panels are sort of my favorite part of the PDC because what I really like about the PDC is getting a chance to hear from customers. We never have this many developers in a room at the same time. So this particular panel, we're going to drill into the future of the common language runtime. I'm very excited to have a set of distinguished panelists here that are involved in setting that future direction of the CLR, as well as having some deep history in what we've already done in the CLR. And just to set the context, the CLR is this lowest level infrastructure bit of the CLR that's responsible for closely managing the execution of your programs. So we're probably not going to spend a bunch of time talking about IDEs or WYSI features in Windows Client Foundation or in the IDEs, but we're going to talk about this low-level infrastructure bit. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves very briefly so you can get an idea of who we have here. So Jim, you want to start?
I'm Jim Miller. I'm an architect on the CLR. I've been on the team for 7 years. Before that, I was a researcher and academic out on the East Coast, worked at the World Wide Web Foundation. And this is a unique experience for me because I've been on many panels before, but I've never been on one where I'm supposed to be actively disagreeing with my panelists who happen to be my boss and his boss.
Nice.
Hi, I'm Jason Zander. I'm the product unit manager of the CLR team. Basically means I run the team. Pointy haircut. That's the boss's boss. Unfortunately, I lost my voice, so this is actually 10 times better than yesterday. And I'm thinking about 2/3 my normal speed on Sudafed, but we'll see how it works. I've been on the team since we started in '97, if anybody remembers the Mary Curtin stuff on the component object runtime way back when. That is why we still have COR in a lot of our file names and APIs. Done various things, file format, metadata, other pieces like that, the compiler work to begin with. Then I was a development lead, development manager, and now the PUM for the group. And that's basically it.
Hi, I'm Rico Mariani. I'm also an architect on the Common Language Runtime. My specialty is performance, so I guess I'm the performance architect. Unlike Jim, I'm very accustomed to disagreeing with every person that I'm on a panel with. I guess it's my job to disagree because I'm supposed to say, hey, that's never going to be fast enough. How do you think you can do that? And I especially enjoy disagreeing with my boss and his boss. So really, this whole situation is very good for me, I think. I'll yield to my colleague.
I'm Patrick Dussud. I'm the lead architect for the CLR. Also was at the origin of the CLR, and I design a lot of pieces, memory manager, and other parts of the CLR. I'm also the chief architect for WinFX 1.0 on the implementation side.
I'm Charlie Kaufman. I'm the newcomer to the team. I've only been here for 2 years, and I'm specialized in security aspects of CLR.
All right, thanks a lot, guys. So again, our primary goal is to get questions from you and get your feedback and comments. So there's a mic here on the floor, so feel free to make your way over there, and we'll kind of get through as many questions as we can in this time. And so we already have one.
Yeah.
So.
Hi, good evening. And you didn't introduce yourself, so.
I'm the moderator. I'm Brad Abrams. I'm a program manager on the CLR team.
The Brad Abrams.
A famous Brad.
Yeah.
That's him,
Yeah. Not long ago, Jeffrey Richter was on .NET Rocks, and he was speaking about that there is no such thing as backward compatible. And on CLR 3.0, you're going to ship you're not going to support side-by-side for CLRs, and you're going to ship all the assemblies of 1.0, 2.0, 1.1, except for maybe MS Core Lib or something like that, it's basics. So what are you going to plan? What are you planning on that issue? Oh.
That's mine.
Yep. Of Jim's alley.
Yeah. Oddly enough, Jeff Richter and I share an office, and I don't know what he said on that topic. He and I have worked on this for 2 years now. The future is certainly not, that wouldn't have been the way I painted it. And in fact, what we're doing for 3.0, the plan is to go more side by side, not less. So the goal is to be absolutely no problem having as many versions of the CLR on the machine as you want, one per process. There's no plan to have 2 different CLRs in the same process, but you could have as many as you want. And in fact, to extend the side-by-side story further than it is today. So today, you choose the CLR, you choose an MS, that automatically chooses the same MS core lib, and that automatically chooses the same entire NetFX stack, 42 other DLLs for you. The place we want to move to in 3.0 is that, in point of fact, you get one CLR, which is the CLR plus the MS core lib, but you get in each app domain to choose which of those stacks of libraries on top you want, so that on a per app domain basis, you could have your app be part of it running with 3.0 stuff, part of it using add-ins in another app domain that are still running on 2.0, part of it add-ins that are still running on 1.1. So that's the place we're trying to move to, is more side-by-side, not less.
We're still trying to maintain a very high compatibility bar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well.
Sorry, thank you.
Right, and so from that perspective, I mean, you probably have seen all of our coverage on 2.0, and the main reason for that is we found side-by-side works incredibly well at the process boundary level, right? It shouldn't be a surprise. But we still have scenarios in process activation where you're using us under COM, for example, where you're going to roll the libraries forward. You need that to keep working. So you expect us to still keep shooting for a very high compat bar.
Yeah, and then I should add the single most important area for app compat, which is really going to keep rigidly at the highest standard we can possibly do, is anything where you communicate across processes or with a perpetual store. So anything that's serialization based. That's why we've invested a lot already in 2.0 with this version tolerant serialization story, so that you can save things now, read them later when additional fields have been loaded, and that's okay. And if you read the other way, the additional fields get put off in a side bucket that you can find. And all of that stuff is to make sure that that investment is 100% safe.
Yeah. Okay. Also, I want to add that the CLR is maturing slowly but surely, and our philosophy is to shift the external visible innovation from the lowest level to higher and higher level. So don't expect the CLR and MS Core Lib in the future to expose more stuff. What we want to do is improve performance, improve various characteristics under the hood on the lower level, and push the external innovation to higher level. So we have WinFX 1.0 coming out, and that's where we do our innovation. And our philosophy is to stabilize the lower level, make them more and more solid, with less and less changes, to have a really rock solid compatibility, and then innovate visibly for programmers in higher levels of the framework, and add new level as it needs to be, and new stacks on the side of BCL and the CLR. So that's, but we'll have innovation. We have tons of people working on the lower level. They result in not externally functional innovation, but better compatibility, better integration with the OS, better performance, better serviceability, all that stuff. That's where we innovate, but not on a new APIs on the lower level. And it's by design to provide a very stable and very compatible platform.
Compatibility is my friend, especially on the performance side, because I want to have the fewest possible DLLs loaded at any given time, right? We're trying to run this on the smallest machines we can to give you the greatest flexibility for targeting. So we really want to maintain that high level of backwards compatibility so that you don't have to have very complicated side-by-side stories. At the same time, we want that side-by-side ability there for you for when you need it, so you've got it.
All right, let's press on to the next one. Yeah.
My name is Kobe. I'm from MCS in Israel. My comment is, I think after this conference, I'm a bit disappointed with Microsoft. I've been speaking to many people in a lot of groups, in the IIS team, in the security group, in Office. And as I understand it, most products coming next year are not based on managed code. And we are pushing managed code, in Israel at least, everywhere, even in very high performance demanding projects, as Rico might tell you. And in Microsoft, internally, most products are still based on native code. Why is that?
So I think you're going to see a reasonable trend towards that. So you've got an announcement on products that in some cases are code bases from 15 to 20 years old, right? So we're not going to ask you, if you've got 20 million lines of code like Office does, to go rewrite it overnight either. I want you to pick the smart places where you're going to go make these changes. So there are other projects that are coming out that are based on managed code that may or may not have been announced. I would point out VSTS, for example, Visual Studio Team System. I think Brian Harry's got somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.5 million lines of code there. You probably saw the Sparkle announcement. Sparkle is 100% C# and managed code. And there are other server products which are not yet announced, but are also coming around this sort of way. So I would expect to see a sane migration. I wouldn't expect anybody to throw out hundreds of millions of lines of code, whatever, take your pick. That's kind of what Microsoft has. You're going to see a same migration over time.
But are there scenarios where you shouldn't use managed code? Are there scenarios where you're...
We're not yet prepared to write device drivers.
Okay, no device drivers. Okay.
Research projects.
Well, I mean, an unfortunate one that we'd like to fix is right now, the strong advice is do not use managed code to write shell extensions. And so that's one that we, there are good technical reasons why with today's technology on both the shell and the managed code side, that's just not a wise decision. But that doesn't.
And that's for in-proc?
In-proc shell extensions don't use managed code, but other than that.
Really, that means any managed code or frameworks in general, if you take it to the extreme.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Right.
don't
So
use
not
Java
just
there either.
CLR.
Java, I mean, basically what Jim's pointing out is the old DLL hell problem, right? Whoever gets loaded first into IE wins, and the rest of it's like Lord of the Flies, right? So that can be kind of scary. So that's the problem you're seeing.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing to look at is there are, it sort of depends on what you mean by products. Is MSN a product of Microsoft? How many of the MSN properties are ASP.NET based, and there's a phenomenal amount of managed code that's doing unbelievably high performance stuff there and on Microsoft.com and so forth. So a lot of it is in funny, sort of not the place you think of Microsoft as being. So it's happening, but a project at Microsoft to just say, well, let's just take some perfectly well-running happy code base and rewrite it all in managed code because we think it's a neat thing to do, kind of hard to sell to management.
Yeah, I actually don't want you doing that. I mean, there's business to run too. I think you're going to see more migration from the top down, more apps and things like that. And when people do start new server projects like VSTS, they shoot for that kind of mode. It's easier, it's productivity. You should make your choice. I wouldn't expect SQL Server Engine, Oracle, take your pick, database kind of stuff to do the same thing, same kind of example.
If you ask me strategically, the most important thing, and I think you are seeing it, is that all the programming surfaces that non-Microsoft programmers will use to talk to Microsoft should be managed. That's what WinFX is. That's the most important single place to make sure it's happening, because that affects the vast majority of people outside the company. And then from there it will percolate in a natural way as you're rewriting things and so forth, and it's a natural progression.
All right, great. Thank you. Next question.
Hi. Sorry. First off, I'd like to say thank you for what you've done because you make my job a whole lot easier.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I do have a number of questions. I'm just going to ask one. I'll jump back in the line so other people can get a chance to ask questions. But first one's on garbage collection, the future of, and specifically with the threading model. I know that the SQL Server team, when they detect when the garbage collection is going to happen, they switch threading models. Garbage collection fails, they go back because, as you know, all threads are suspended all through. Is that going to change in the future? Are you working on things in that direction, or is the garbage collection always going to take over the whole entire system in order to do its job?
Patrick?
I think it's an overstatement. There is synchronization that has to happen, handshake that has to happen between the memory manager and the host when the host is in control of threading, to at least let know the host that it would be stupid, for example, to try to accept no request when the threads are busy doing synchronizing for garbage collection. So there is a handshake. The handshake right now on server GC is on the form that all of the CLR threads are blocked during the entire garbage collection. We have another flavor, which is the concurrent GC, designed for interactive apps, where instead of blocking for the entire length of the full collection, we have two small pauses where the threads are blocked and then resume. The garbage collection happens in parallel, and then there is another synchronization where all of the threads needs to be stopped again to get essentially stable points, checkpoints, where you have a stable memory image that you can snapshot. In the future, certainly the very large heaps will make full collections too long to be sustainable for our system. So in the future, yes, we are working on systems where the garbage collector will happen in parallel with the execution of the program, and long pauses will be avoided. But there will still be that synchronization point between the host and the garbage collector to get to stable points, so we can either snapshot or techniques like this in order to maintain a correct memory image.
Okay, great. Next question.
My question probably goes to Rico. Well, feel free. It's basically my question is all questions about the client side CLR performance, because server side is pretty much, we don't care about cold start, and learning from Java world server side just flies, and client side didn't really catch up. And I see right now with .NET runtime the same problem. There are 3 problems right now: cold startup time, which is relatively slow, and as I've learned yesterday from Microsoft side people, Vista is not going to initialize .NET runtime as default, so we have to do something to initialize and start up to run application faster. Second question, the .NET memory manager is a GC-based memory manager, and it actually fights with Windows memory manager all the time, because the nature of GC is to take as much memory as possible to make location smoother. But Windows memory manager, everything else starves basically, which we see in our scenarios. And third question, the future of my favorite subject, NGen. Thank you.
Sounds like the third one's related to the first.
Yeah, the third one's related to the first. They're kind of all
Before you go,
intertwined.
Rico, how many people are seeing performance issues in client scenarios? Performance issues in client scenarios? Okay, we got a few people with similar set of questions.
Okay. So performance on the client, it seems to me that I was hired to help with that problem, was I not?
Isn't that
As it turns out, that's, yeah.
That's pretty much my job at my work.
I think we were working on that. Okay, so what can I tell you? On the client, space is king, and it'll probably continue to be king. So our big investments in this release, probably the single biggest investment that we made in terms of CLR performance, was to improve the NGen system so that we could reduce substantially the fraction of private pages in executables that have been compiled, and overall working set, especially for the system libraries. That makes it possible to target more systems, smaller systems. Now, all of that translates into better cold startup time, because smaller working set means less pages have to be faulted in, that's less I/O. All your costs tend to be I/O bound. It also helps you in the warm cases. Now, you were also talking about Windows Vista. Now, I don't know how long it will be the case that Windows Vista doesn't start up the CLR, because I have a feeling what will end up happening is little boot thingies will get in people's start menus and they'll drag the CLR in. But even if you weren't pulling in the CLR, if you tend to use the CLR, Windows Vista Superfetch technology is going to preload those pages regardless of whether or not the execution happens. So from the perspective of running a CLR application, you will find that people who tend to use managed applications will tend to have more of the CLR components effectively warm, right? Increasingly so if you use some of their additional features, such as the out-of-band USB storage. So I think you'll find that we're going to help you somewhat in terms of your cold and your warm startup by being more frugal with the space, having better locality overall in our DLLs, and we made a huge push there. So you'll see the page counts for comparable levels of functionality in MS Core Lib are much smaller. The shareability is much higher. 50% shareability previously to 90% shareability now. Those are right on point. Now, your third question was about NGen, and I think I've kind of discussed the NGen points already in answering.
Memory manager.
So I'll talk about the memory manager.
That's right. I'll yield to Patrick for the memory
Well,
manager.
basically the interaction of native memory manager with,
Right, yes.
GC.
So I respectfully disagree with the statement you said. Actually, the garbage collector tries very hard to stay very compact, and we are actually competitive with anti-heaps or various malloc implementations where the level of fragmentation, therefore unused memory that is not used by the program is higher than what we typically see. Also, the OS can communicate to us, and we take cues from the OS. We constantly monitor the memory load, which is the fraction of unused RAM, or the fraction of total RAM in use versus the total RAM. And when we get into the 90% range, GC gets into a high activity mode where it will try very hard to compact a lot more in order to avoid the onset of paging. It also has asynchronous notifications, that the low memory notification that has been implemented on XP Plus. And the garbage collector listens for that event. And when that event gets signaled by the OS, then we go back to high activity mode where we try very hard to compact again. So we are actually very interested in scenario where those things don't work as well as we believe they should. And
I'll be happy to report it to you.
You should do that.
You should do it.
That's what you should do.
Ladybug is good.
Right. And full memory dumps are our friends. We can certainly, if we get a full memory dump, analyze it and report on exactly what goes on. Moving forward, we are actually adding a lot more internal activity tracing, so we can replay the history and find out what led to an event that is not satisfactory.
I'm sorry for interruption, but I was hoping you would tell me about the future of NGen, not the current state,
Yeah.
because I'm pretty much familiar.
Let me mention that one. I'd written a blog on the 1X stuff way back when, and we have resolved some of those issues in the V2.0 product. One of those is like fragility on servicing events and things like that. And so the 2.0 product comes with queue. You can go set priorities on things to background compile. You can do an NGen update, which with the servicing event will go recompile the transitive closure, make things work better. So I think it's much improved. That said, I think there's still a lot more that we can do.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, the ones after that I'm thinking of, this is the Rico's pit of success. I'd like it to be a pit of success because I still find that when I work with customers trying to get the NGen closure and the hard binding down right and understanding all the domain stuff, so we add some of the intrinsics. I'd like to make it much more automatic. In a lot of cases, the system just should notice that, hey, you happen to be running, a sharp reader or, something like a nice managed application. Wow, the thing's got base address collisions. Can we fix that for you automatically? Right? Can we watch the way your app is running and say, we actually do have some, Pogo-style hinting already kind of built into the system, but we just haven't exposed it yet. So I'd love to productize and expose that and then hook it up. And you come back in on a Monday and, wow, your system's running a lot faster. It's a similar analogy to the superfetch work that's been done in the base OS.
In this version, we made it possible to produce highly optimized, highly shared native binaries to a much greater extent than ever before. And I think that will enable adoption by a lot of people, even inside of Microsoft, to kind of answer a previous question, where some people might have been shying away because that level of sharing wasn't possible. But it's still quite difficult to do it, there's lots of processes you have to go through to figure out what to hardbind, what to base regen, and so forth. It would be great to take our existing services and make it so that, as Jason says, they're a lot more automatic. With regard to the garbage collector, sometimes what people experience, and this is something that's new in this version, we have some time-based features now where we'll engage garbage collections after certain period of time, even if activity has been reduced. Some people have been experiencing situations where memory lingers longer than they expect it to, and because in previous versions of the collector, there might not appear to be any reason for a GC to be activated because memory activity was fairly low, but due to idleness, for instance, it might still be prudent to bring the memory usage down. Our new collector in Whippy will be doing more of that to try to bring back pages as soon as possible, and that results in just a much better perceived performance for people because you minimize an app, give it a few seconds, and it yields memory back to the OS in a much more timely fashion. I think we'll see more of that as well in the garbage collector, where there's more dynamic tuning and feedback associated with the UI. I'd like to see some of that, so you can expect me to push for some of it.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Next question.
My question has to do with the upcoming features. Are there any changes in the horizon for the global assembly cache? And are there any plans for any kind of local assembly cache support so that as an application, I can not require power user or administrator if I want to have versioned components of my own that don't need system. If I have a componentized application, I want to have, right now I have to do that by hand and override assembly resolution and complex mechanisms. I would think that this is a common enough scenario, and like applications might benefit from a local assembly cache. And is that planned or anything like that?
Jim, I think everyone's looking at
Yes,
you.
yep, that's right. I wouldn't call it a local assembly cache, but for 3.0, we're looking at a fairly substantial revamp of how that whole binding mechanism works, and something that's much more streamlined, much more efficient, and much more controllable by the application developer and by the IT deployment folks. So we're working on that. In fact, as soon as I get back to Redmond, the next job on my agenda is to try to find a small group of companies that want to try to prototype some of this, try out prototypes from us and engage in the design activity. So if you're interested in that, get me your name, and that goes for everybody here. That particular area is one we're specifically targeting for 3.0. There's nothing I can tell you about it specifically now because we're still in the early design stages, but there's no question that a solution to that problem is important. That particular way of solving it is probably not the way we're going to go. At least that's not what we're expecting right now. But the requirement that a non-power user be able to install things for an app to pick up, absolutely.
The issue still stands, though, is that if I have a componentized system and a master frame, I mean, I have different versions of different binaries, and I know that component X is reliant on component Y version 2.6. And those are both loading up in the same application, and the file names are the same. So I need some mechanism which I can, by combination of the version and the strong name, store and resolve those within the application's local directory.
So one idea, which is the one that is likely to be where we go, is that there's a deployment manifest that takes the assembly name and directly maps that to the file name, rather than our having to guess and probe and poke around in the system, and then ultimately, in many cases, because of the design of the app, we fail and we fire a resolve event, and then you get control, and you do your own probe.
That's what we do now.
Unbelievably slow. The plan is that you give us an explicit list of places to look. We do no probing whatsoever, except in the GAC for servicing reasons. So we do exactly 2 probes of the file system. If that fails, we call your event. It's yours. You own the complete control of it. It's much more streamlined, much faster.
And would that probing system allow for different named subdirect? I mean, would that work at the DLL level too, so that a DLL has its own manifest of what components and versions it needs?
No, you will provide a tool that lets you roll that up into the application's manifest.
Right, but the application's manifest may not have any idea if it's a generic loading mechanism.
So for add-in, I gave a talk on managed add-ins. There is a story for managed add-ins. In that case, the add-ins run in their own app domain, and each app domain gets exactly that ability.
Okay, maybe we can take this offline, but we have a scenario where that would be very inefficient, so...
Yep, we should talk about that. Yep.
All right, great. Next.
Are there any future plans to allow unloading assemblies without having to resort to another app domain?
Unloading assemblies.
I told you that was coming.
Common request.
That's that's probably one of the highest hits on my blog. Use the old, put something in the title, everyone will grab on. Yeah, and so there is no assembly.unload, and so that's one of the topics we're interested in hearing here. We do have the ability to unload at the app domain boundary. I know of a couple of things that makes people not happy about doing that. What kind of scenario are you in?
Well, I was at the managed add-ins session there, and it looked like they were going through a lot of trouble to be able to unload these things and there was other reasons, security reasons, et cetera, but it seemed like one of the reasons this was necessary to use another app domain was simply because you couldn't unload the assemblies.
Why is assembly unloading hard? Go into why we can't just get a dev on that and...
Yeah, assembly unloading, I wrote up in my blog. It's not that it's 100% rocket science, right? There's a little bit of, you have to keep track of all the references that people have into it. You don't want it to disappear on you, you want to collect it at the right point in time. The way the loader heaps work within an app domain is kind of left to right, so you leave holes and you have to go back and modify that. So I do think that we could take somebody smart on the loader team, have them spend some time kind of go off and figure it out. Part of the issue is more at the design principle, though. One of the other reasons for having app domains or processes, for that matter, is to have proper isolation. So the gentleman before you just said, I've got issues where I want to load precisely the right kind of closure. As you start, pouring more stuff into the same genetic pool, they start to mix in bad sorts of ways. So, one of the things that what Jim's describing is to not only do it just for, hey, that's the only way to get unloading. It's because you need it to get proper versioning and componentization boundaries in the first place. And then after you've got that, well, then of course we have the unloading mechanism there, right? So I think that's more the design philosophy we're pushing you towards, as opposed to having a visceral reaction to assembly.unload. It's like, well, what scenario are we, then asking or letting you go do that we may not be healthy for you on the other end of it.
Okay. All right, good. Next question.
Actually, that just brings up a related question.
Well, you're back through the queue, so you're up, man.
I had different questions, but that came up, so I decided to go with this.
Excellent.
A lot of times, in order to, when I want to load up an assembly and I want to get rid of it, it's only because I want to reflect right through it and not actually do anything with it. I understand you did put something into the CLR so that we can actually load up an assembly and reflect through it. But after hearing Jeffrey's talk, that it's not actually being unloaded. Is it going to be unloaded at some point? Do we have to wait for 3.0, or will there be like an update patch sometime after Would-Be ships where we can actually load up assembly, reflect to it, and then toss it away without having to go through the whole app domain process?
I think he's asking about the reflection-only context.
Yes.
And reflection. Jim, are you there?
I apologize. The original design for that was absolutely that you could unload it, it would go away. And then amongst others, took our eye off the ball, and that isn't what got built. And it's not going to be a simple fix to build it that way. However, an alternate mechanism that does exactly that may likely happen, and it would be an add-on thing. It wouldn't need to be, it wouldn't need to be built into the core of the system. It would operate differently. It would not interoperate as well with reflection. So you couldn't combine it as easily as you can with the current reflection system. But if all you want is to load something, inspect it, do the work, and throw it away, it would handle that perfectly. In fact, right now, there are several sites that I wrote a PE file reader-writer that does this. Some guys in Australia did a much nicer one called PerWappy, which does this. There's a third one at least, which don't load the file at all. They simply inspect it from its disk file format, return exactly the information you would have gotten out from reflection. They don't happen to use the reflection API itself. And so it depends on which trade-off you want, and I'd love to talk to you afterward about what the real requirement is. If the requirement is you need something that actually gives you reflection objects that you can actually pass to the rest of reflection, that's a big order. If what you need is just something that gives you the same information you would have gotten out of reflection, that's easy, and there are already tools that you can download to do that, and may, in fact, be closer to what you need.
Well, basically what I'm doing now is when I'm starting up my framework, I actually start off a loader app domain, start throwing the assemblies in there, reflecting through them, and then toss away that app domain.
Yeah.
It would have been easier if I didn't have to go through that trouble. I'm okay now. I can do it.
Yep.
But seeing the new thing come along and say, hey, that'd be perfect, but then find out it's broken, it's kind of disappointing. Does that mean it's like totally dead, that like it'll never get fixed, or is it?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, this is one of those unfortunate,
Right.
when the developers
I can understand
actually,
things happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, I think part of the issue is that when the scenario team built it, then one of the requirements was our own self-cycling builds inside. So being able to run TLB import that uses a version of the runtime versus the one that I just compiled and things like that. So the load behavior you're seeing is sufficient for fixing that problem, It would have been nice if we, thought the entire thing through end to end and, solve this problem too. So sorry about that. we'll want to fix it.
The fundamental problems that are associated with assembly unloading for fully loaded assemblies, things like the dangling method table pointers, the opportunity to, you could subtype via reflection emit an assembly that was partially loaded and then try to unload it and have dangling classes. There's just lots of exotic things that can happen. Those problems don't exist for reflection-only assemblies. So, the superhuman effort on the part of someone on the loader team, it's not the same level of effort to fix the reflection-only case as it is to go and plow forward with general purpose assembly loading. So
it's good feedback.
In principle, it could happen.
All right, next.
Hi, the question I have is probably way out in the future. I'd just like to get your thoughts on turning .NET into a real-time system.
Real-time.
Windows has to become a real-time system first, doesn't it? I actually give some advice to people who are trying to use .NET in highly constrained situations for time. And in fact, there's been some successful video games. I met with a gentleman who had produced a successful managed video game and was getting upwards of 100 frames per second reliably out of .NET. Some of the features that are coming along in Windows in terms of ability to create background things and the same features that they use to produce glitch-free video will be helpful for us in terms of, in the long term anyway, of providing some level of guarantee and control. But the key is to make sure that you're very careful about what you're doing in any given cycle, making sure that if you're doing regular garbage collections, that you're getting the more inexpensive ones, that your promotion rate into the older generations is comparatively low, and that those collections are happening either, if it was a game, for instance, it would be like at zone transitions or whatever else, and not so much associated with any given frame. Many of the applications for real-time have enough constraint in the problem itself that it becomes possible to actually understand all of the allocations that are going to happen and all of the function calls that are going to happen and have a pretty good idea, even in managed code, what needs to happen for it to run. Obviously, if you're running in a real-time environment, you'll want to ensure that things like, haphazard jitting doesn't happen on your normal code path, right? Because that could easily glitch you. But again, if the problem domain is sufficiently constrained that real-time makes sense for it, it's not completely crazy to use a managed runtime under the hood. Even games that weren't built on top of .NET, and I keep coming back to games as an example of real-time software, many games use a managed runtime for their AI. And have been for a very long time because it's very convenient, and they do the kinds of things that I'm talking about. They have a good idea of what objects they need, what the scope of their problem is. They don't have rich add-in modules where arbitrary code can run at arbitrary times. And by putting those constraints on themselves, they're able to deliver very smooth performance.
But just to be clear, though, there's a big gradient between the fuzzy dice, Ruby, Python side over here to the stripped down, completely provable. I'm flying your plane that we're riding home in tomorrow.
Exactly.
Right? And when you're out at that far into the gradient, then there really is no other way to do that other than to rip out anything that's asynchronous or unpredictable. You have to have provable models for 100% of everything. Right, which usually means I strip all the features down to bare bones. And at that point, what are you actually getting? Right, you're mostly getting probably some system that's just taking the instruction set and doing a very simple pre-compiled. Like they don't even want JIT or engine or anything else like that. So that far into the spectrum, nothing there. I think what Rico's talking about is improved responsiveness, things like that are still in that, other part of the gradient, and that part makes sense.
You could be all the way over to real-time executive kinds of needs, right, where you really need to be able to time the thing. And I don't know that we're ever going there, but the kinds of things I'm talking about are where the mean time to glitch is very high, like maybe multiple hours. So you could do things like produce high-quality video for 4 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours, 20 days, and still be there. But that's not the same as I can control the ailerons on the 747, right?
The odd thing is that we do have a sister team called the Compact Framework, and their approach, which is a much lighter weight JIT that's really closer to an interpreter, and a garbage collector that runs in a slightly different mode may well be the better approach. It's just sort of odd, and I don't think, I can't speak for them. I don't know if they're investing in that space either. But for back in my Lisp days, that kind of approach is one that was actually quite successful in the real-time market, because there it's an interpreter. You can guarantee, you can time the number of cycles for each IL instruction. You can say, okay, that's it. Do that many, slice it there, and then we'll take the garbage collector. We know how much you allocated, and you can do all of the right calculations, and you can get it to where it's never easy. I mean, I've never seen this be easy, but you may find that you use a different form of managed code than the CLR.
All right, let's press on to the next one.
Hi. I'd like to ask about the future of COM, because my company has a lot of applications that are COM-based, and what I gathered from a previous answer to a different question is that Microsoft is moving in the direction that the machine is not going to run anything that's not managed code unless it's signed by Microsoft.
So I'm sorry, you heard that at a talk here?
Yeah.
All right.
I'm sorry. You heard what? Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I think what he's saying is he heard that any unmanaged code has to be signed before it can be run, and we'd only run managed code.
It's got to be the security guys telling
Yeah, that had to be a security statement, and I haven't heard that. There is an emphasis to be able to configure a lockdown system so that essentially that users can't download arbitrary programs. In that case, they'll be locked down in such a way they can't run arbitrary managed programs either. There is an effort to progressively sandbox things into safer and safer sandboxes, and the managed code does provide one of the sandboxing mechanisms by which you can allow users to safely download things and run them and know that they can't do damage to your system. But there are other sandboxing mechanisms that will work with unmanaged code that will be providing that as well. So there'll be an increasing trend to say you can't run privileged programs unless they have unless they're signed by some entity configured as trusted on the node. We wouldn't be just you can only run things provided by Microsoft, but it'd be that you can't run things unless the system administrator is configured the creator is trusted. But that's a matter of how many writes the thing will run with, and it will apply to managed and unmanaged code alike.
And just to respond to the general thing about the future of COM, I think COM has a long future ahead of itself. Our customers have millions of lines of COM code. We have millions and millions of lines of COM code. That code will continue to work on new platforms for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think the trends you're probably going to see are the ones that Charlie mentions on locking the machine down. You heard in Jim's keynote as well about making it so you run as a normal user as opposed to elevated. So that will, of course, have impact. And the other one is the versioning componentization kind of boundary, continuing to load stuff in process. Just doesn't work incredibly well, right? So I expect you'll see that kind of push as well. But as Brad says, we're not going to turn around and say your code can't run and there's no way to configure your machine to run in the future. That wouldn't be very hard.
We could never get away with such a thing. That would really be embarrassing for us. All of this is really about trends to giving corporations and parents, as far as that goes, more options to control some or all of their PCs in various different ways that make it more efficient for them to do business. That's what it's all about, because ultimately, we're in the business to make, everyone more productive, from the developers down to the consumers and the IT guys. And so if they need these lockdown features so that they can run their banks smoothly, then we can give them those kinds of features. But lockdown for just Microsoft, weird, bizarre.
All right, thank you.
Good, thank you. Next question.
Hi. Operating system basics. If I run a lot of unmanaged applications that happen to be the same or have shared components, I pay the code cost once in terms of memory. What is the futures for managed applications? If I'm running a future 200 copies of Word which has been rewritten in .NET, how are you going to mitigate the cost of 200 executables which get jitted separately?
Engine.
Engine, yeah.
We already do this
All
today.
said that in unison, right?
Yeah.
Engine.
For shareability, we can't share JITted code because it's dynamically allocated. So for where shareability is a requirement, then we want to put people on the engine path, and we'd like to be able to, future-wise, we'd like to be able to detect that's happening, and maybe engine some things in the background, choose appropriate base addresses. Looking further in the future, we'll have 64-bit machines. We'll have lots more flexibility as to where we can put these things, and much less of a worry of creating fragmented address spaces and so forth. So we can have nice striped executables that we're producing. And as we start noticing these copies of managed Word running, and I really would like the idea of having a managed Word running, as we start noticing these copies of managed Word running, we can go ahead and engine them up so that the third and fourth and fifth copy is going to be, running shared code. I mean, looking forward, we could have more and more processors with more and more cores in them. We might be able to, spin up an engine process in the background and not impact your foreground task at all. There's lots of things we could do, right? So speaking more to making engine automatic, we've enabled that today. I mean, it's possible to do it, but it's hard.
And we do it for the core frameworks and WinFX already,
Right.
part of the install.
So some people might not know what Engine is. Engine's at its lowest level is a command line tool you can run across an IL assembly, and it essentially turns it into native code. And all the systems that work in the base OS around native code, like code sharing, things like that, work across that. So it's commonly used as an install step when you install an application. And as I just mentioned, as we install WinFX, we install the OS, we engine large parts of the base system itself, and then as you install your large applications, you can engine those as well.
You pay for MS Core Lib once, right? Well, 90% of MS Core Lib once, because we're still 10% private, but I'm working on it.
The other side of that is .NET and similar languages tend to use a lot more objects, a lot more dynamic memory, whereas old-style code was much more static. So although the code is shareable by NGen, there's a lot more state than there used to be just in the general running of the program. Is there any plans in the future to allow any of that to be shared, or to have JITs that understand I've got many copies of this running, and maybe I can do some sharing or use the same approach in... So if you're doing garbage collection, say, well, I've got 2 instances of the same process, I can use the same sort of techniques for both of them and learn. I mean, it's all... are there any future plans to...
Sharing objects dynamically across processes is very problematic for lots of reasons. I mean, not the least of which is, for instance, any object is lockable. However, lots of times people have fairly complicated initialization steps that they take, and they want to create, trees or groups of objects that represent fairly rich state and persist them into their images. And they have complex class constructors, for instance, that do that now. I've spent a good deal amount of time looking into the possibility of taking some of those classes and putting them directly into images at engine time so that they can then be shared across processes. That can be a very effective technique for things like the security policy tree, for instance, that stays constant for long periods of times. But I put that still in the future world. Because of the locking issues and some of the object usage issues, you could easily end up with a very complicated programming model that no one could understand to get the sharing happening. And really, I would say that getting a programming model that people can understand and so that they can create shared data structures like this is probably the more challenging problem than actually doing the sharing. Because in principle, we could create a garbage collected segment, put it in a shared memory section, and expose it across 5 different processes and let you party on it, as long as they were running the same version of the CLR, right? And the same loaded assemblies, plus or minus, some magic. We could share it. But, what would the semantics of that be, and how do you arrange for locking, and oh boy.
What's the security impact? Depending on where you write there,
So
still verifiable.
the programming model would be terrifying. And so we have to find a way, in order to make greater sharing of dynamic data possible, we have to find a way to make the programming model for that very simple. Maybe that means borrowing some notions from the database world, because databases do this all the time. But it's, that one's definitely on my radar, because anytime I can convert private data into shared data, I'm dancing in the hallway.
The one that's most likely is the great big statically initialized data structure. We've had designs for that for 7 years. And You know, we actually got through architects meetings, and in the end, it's like, 64 bits coming a few years from now. You know, it's like, because, the data types are going to change size. I can't share those, so, yeah. So we can make some of those sort of things happen. It hasn't really been high, so it'd be good to hear your feedback if you think that's really getting in your way is the next step. I personally think this 40% win that these guys have driven in 2.0 and sharing is going to be tremendous. So if you haven't tried 2.0 yet, definitely give it a try.
1/5, right? The private memory is 1/5 what it used to be. Okay, that's the way to think of it.
Yeah, I think so. All right, so
I have a question for you all, and you have to answer it.
Okay. Well, there you go. You
All
have
right,
us here.
including Brad.
Okay.
Including Brad, aha.
What's your top 2 exciting, cool features for the next CLR?
But you mean after 2.0?
After it's 2.0 is, it's
Yeah, 2.0
already
is done.
Yeah, it's done. And the next thing is obfuscation. Do you know anything about if we are planning to obfuscate the .NET framework? And if we do think about it, please don't do it. Okay. Yeah, I consider it like the best open source project on the planet, using Reflector and lots of other.
I gotta applaud for .NET Reflector too. I get so much customer satisfaction and save time out of people using .NET Reflector. I think at least from my job anyway. That's been a real asset. But why don't we go left to right?
Let's do the second one first. Charlie, do you want to talk about obfuscation in general and?
Obfuscation is a hard problem. It's fundamentally a security by obscurity. There is no finish line. You're never done. You're always keeping one step ahead of the guys that are cleverly de-obfuscating the thing that you've done. That is one of the odd cases where it sort of inherently gives third-party vendors an advantage over Microsoft, because whatever we ship will be the target of what everybody tries to reverse engineer and de-obfuscate, whereas if nobody has more than 10% of the market, it keeps the guys busy. And people can ship with revised versions on a rapid schedule and keeping ahead of them. And that's frustrating for all concerned, but it's sort of the nature of the beast with obfuscation. And this applies both to managed code and to unmanaged code in terms of people being able to reverse engineer these things. The only real solution to that is to not run the code on the client machine, but to have it be either on a server that's under your control or in some sort of trusted computing base like functionality that people have been talking about for years and that may or may not arrive on a desktop near you.
I think he wants to know if we have plans to obfuscate our stuff, though. Is that what?
No plans.
Right.
No plans to obfuscate.
And how are we about
for the .NET framework?
The .NET framework.
Yeah.
Right. And how are we about Source? What are we doing for Source this time? I think
Rotor 2.
Rotor 2.
There will be a Rotor version 2.0.
How many are familiar with Rotor? Yeah, familiar with Rotor?
Hey.
All right.
All right, popular. Yeah. We don't have plans to release the desktop source code at this time, though.
But if you're not familiar, Rotor is essentially the exact same code base we build the CLR. We take a few pieces of intellectual property out of there, but other than that, it's the exact same code base, and it's available for FreeBSD and Windows, and you can see the exact source code there. And as Jason mentioned, we are actively working on getting Rotor that's paired with 2.0 out. That should be 6 months or so after 2.0 ships. All right. Oh, and we should go around and do our features.
Start with you, man.
Okay, good. I get to start. So good. I'll start, and then I'll say. That's right. I was going to say that. That's why I'll gladly start.
You don't have the mic anymore.
So
I have to think of something to take in.
Mine is being sort of a library guy. What I think is really exciting is the changes that we're going to need to make to libraries to enable the new scripting set of languages that are out there. Looking at the libraries that's available for Ruby and Python and whatever, it's some good inspiration there for us. And I think it's a real hard, challenging problem to make the users of dynamic languages happy, at the same time not losing kind of the goodness that we already have in the framework today. So that'll be an interesting thing. I look forward to figuring that problem out.
with no commitment from Microsoft that these will actually happen.
Good point. That's right. Good point, Jim. This is
Fantasy Island, right?
And we're talking about the immediate next release. Things I'd like to see happen are really good support for dynamic languages. I've been saying that for 7 years. I haven't changed my tune. That's the one thing I think we're seriously missing, and I want to see us move there. And the other is some really good work on debugging and bringing back things like the OS debugging experience and the ability to go cross from managed to unmanaged absolutely reliably and be able to do it cross debugging between 64-bit and 32-bit and between if you're using a remote device, being able to debug devices and so forth. I think all of those things, that whole space deserves a little more attention than it's gotten so far.
So I would dynamic languages. That's my number one. That's a sexy, cool thing. You're going to hear it a lot. I mean, this is why I asked Jim to come and bring IronPython with him. We're starting to get this set up. And Dr. Miller's has been saying for 7 years. I can attest to that. I do think that it's a great place for us to be, and there's a whole bunch of new stuff that we can do there. I'd really like to see the C in common again. I want a whole bunch of languages in there. I want nice framework libraries that work very well. We got the Monad team and everything else now plugs in well to Link. I mean, the whole ecosystem has to be there. And then when I go plug it into applications and get the tools on top of it and get this nice kind of ecosystem going, that's just starting to take off. I think it's very exciting. Let me pick another one that's not maybe as sexy per se, but is actually very important, and that's deployment. I think deployment is an area that a lot of people have a lot of pain with right now. We're trying to make it a little bit better on top of 2.0. I don't think we've done as good enough job as we can. Right? I think isolation bugs people, trying to get the framework deployed, componentization size of the runtime and other stuff like that is always an issue. So I think we will be spending some very serious time on that in version 3.0 and see if we can meet some of those customer needs. So I'd love to hear you guys' feedback on that.
I'm not going to say dynamic languages. I love Jim. I love IronPython, but it's not
performance dynamic.
I'm performance dynamic. I'm just going to add those two words. No, okay. So my number one is I'm going to plug Link. I'm going to plug Link, and the reason I'm really excited about Link is because it gives us, for the first time, I think, an opportunity to look at a bigger chunk of work, right? For you guys to tell us something about what you're trying to do to a whole data set in the same way that the SQL guys have had for a long time. And that gives us a tremendous new fertile ground for doing compiler optimizations, for doing parallelization, for doing background indexing, and just general purpose analysis, some really rich analysis, for doing robust threading and other kinds of isolation models. There's just tremendous fertile ground there. And so I think on a going forward basis, the kinds of investments we're going to need to make, and we got to do some pretty good stuff to make that work, right? Because I don't know if you've seen those Link demos, but when you look and every time he types selects, I think I start counting how many anonymous delegates he created, and I think I better make those smaller. They got to be smaller. Yeah, and so I'm like, oh, everyone is a little, but they don't have to be big. They don't have to be big. Okay, and the second one is I'm supposed to talk about perf. Yeah, I do. I'd like you to have yours. Okay, so the second one is about perf. I would really like it to be the case that when you're typing in, okay, you're using IntelliSense and you're typing in some methods, and that little drop down comes up. There's some idea. Throw me a bone, people. And there's some idea how much these methods are going to cost you, and whether it's maybe a good idea. All this method in the context you're in, and there's lots we can do, and I've been already starting to talk to the FX Cop people about how can we do some static analysis, how can we get overall complexity, and if you're writing a hash function, maybe we should say that maybe this isn't a good time to initialize system.xml, in your probably rule that out. Okay, so and just the basics would be great, and I want to get that out there, and I'd love to get that basic information out there for Whitby, and I'll be doing some work to try to make that happen. So that's what I'm about.
All right, so I have few things I'd like. The most immediate is I look forward to the CLR running WinFX 1.0. I think it's our next. That's our next programming surface that is really rich. It stresses the CLR in lots of ways, and we'll continue to have to support it and make changes deep down in the CLR in order to improve the experience for WinFX 1.0. That's a short-term thing. The challenges that I look forward to after that are 64-bit. 2.0 runs on 64-bit. 64-bit will bring a whole bunch of new problems that we've never seen before. We have machines back home with half of a terabyte of RAM, okay, on 64. Okay, when everybody has half terabytes, the heaps are going to be big. And, that's something that I look forward to solving, which is yet an unsolved problem largely that I'm going to pay some attention to. Second is multi-core. So, right now when you have a 2P machine, with hyper-threading, right? Like four logical processors running, and you look, and hyper-threading doesn't really work, so you only have two. In the future, we'll have multi-core, truly separate CPU, and how the next challenge is how to make use of it and how to make the application being able to take advantage of it. And for that, you need probably new programming language, certainly new support in the CLR, and that's a wide area. So those two long-term really are exciting to me.
And Charlie?
I'm the security guy, so I am most excited, in fact, about a trend that we've started in 2.0 and made a lot of progress on, but we want to make more, which is to make use of security simpler. 1.0 and 1.1, put out this incredibly rich, powerful thing so that you could do anything if you could figure out how.
And you can prevent people to do anything.
Coding for a low privilege environment, in CLR should be no harder than coding for the running as non-admin in a normal process. You shouldn't have to think about it. The debugging environment should be set up so that you test in that way, and it just works. And there is really substantial progress in 2.0. Things are a lot more usable, but the idea is to make that so that it becomes a second nature, natural thing to do, and makes it easy, something that most people don't, developers don't have to think about much, and users don't have to think about at all, and it just works out there.
Great. Cool, thank you. Next.
All right. My question, I guess, has a little bit of background. You guys have probably heard of the Jeff Richter book, and I'm forgetting the name of it. It's funny, my team calls it the Bible. So, are there any books in the future or that are out now that you'd recommend for the CLR2? And are there any plans to write stuff for the future versions of CLR?
So Jeff is actively working on updating his book. He claims it's the last time he'll ever write a book, so you need to buy that one.
Yeah.
Other ideas?
What about Joe's or?
Oh yeah, right. So Joe here. Yeah. So Joe Duffy, a PM on my team, is working on a book. So we have to plug our own team stuff. That'll be out early next year.
Isn't there a design guidelines book out too?
Yeah,
Isn't there an author with a microphone up here?
It's not really about the CLR per se. About how to build reusable class libraries, which we use internally.
It's a good book.
Rico has a lot of information in a prescriptive architecture guidance book from MS Press.
mstn.microsoft.com/perf.
3 big chapters in there.
Yeah. Then there's some really good information there across the board about the .NET framework, including lots of good information about how to use the CLR. And there's the annotated SLR. That's good too.
Yep. Yeah, so Stephen Pratchner has a book on kind of extending and customizing the CLR, hosting the CLR, I think it's called.
We should blog a list.
Yeah.
Make it really easy for you. You don't have to scribble.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I'll blog a list of the books that we've mentioned here. Anybody here have one they love, a 2.0 CLR book? Oh yeah, okay, the Stevens book, okay. You have one?
Any chance of reharnessing Don Box?
Yeah. Don's kind of gone out in the ether in this foofy XML stuff.
Thank you. If anybody needs to cure insomnia, there's a possibility of a second edition of my book, which is the standard for the CLI itself, because we got to do generics. And we've done the standard, so might as well read the book.
Yep. Okay, good.
He's back.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. At least I didn't put them all at one time, right?
No, great. I appreciate that. That's actually very thoughtful.
Thank you. In Jeffrey Richter's pre-con, I learned that assembly load from, and the other I don't remember, are all using the same basic mechanism now where they're all going to the GAC first. Now, if I go assembly load from and I say load it from my directory here, it's actually going to load it up, reflect through it, find out where it actually, what it is, and then go to the GAC and get it instead of loading up mine. That seems backwards to me, and I just need you to explain to me a little bit why you would do something like that. And maybe my thought process is wrong, but it just seems wrong.
It's a versioning question. It goes to you.
It's actually not it's a servicing issue. Microsoft feels extremely strongly that it's imperative that at least Microsoft, but also third parties, be able to repair a serious security flaw, regardless of in which application it happens to be. And so, when we had a flaw in some of our SQL stuff, we had to go search the entire disk for that particular DLL and pray we found them all. Right? We don't want to be in that position again. So we modified this specifically so that there's a central servicing location. You put the new version of your DLL there, and that will be preferred over anyone the user has. And it has to have, in this version, it has to have the same version number and so forth, so you're not likely to have a problem. As we move forward, we're going to do something where there's a specific notion of servicing. We're going to take that 4-part version number and say half of it is about servicing, and we will go to the GAC and find the most recent servicing of that you put on your machine, and that will apply regardless of which app to guarantee that you've got the security fixes on your machine.
Does that include the version number in that? When you said does the version number include in that part?
In what we're doing in 2.0,
yeah,
it has to be an exact match in 2.0, or publisher policy. I mean, right.
And going forward?
And going forward, we'll be splitting the version number, saying the part that's called major minor is what we call a feature release. We will never change that because of what's deployed. The build and revision will be servicing. If there's a higher build and revision in the GAC, we'll take that over what you have in your directory.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah, hi. Anders at one point mentioned that he was considering adding default method implementations to interfaces as a way of solving the interface versioning problem. So just interested to hear whether version 3 or 4 that's been considered, and just get your opinion on it, and just also any new namespaces that are coming with Rota.
So I have to. This is the first I've heard that Anders is thinking about it. I've been asking him for 5 years to do that. So I'm delighted. Maybe we'll finally get it. So I'm going to talk to my boss's boss when I get back to see whether we could get that on the list of things. I have long felt that was an absolutely important thing. If we had default implementations of virtual methods on interfaces, several customers have come back and said that would give us about 90% of what we ever asked for out of multiple inheritance. And so we'll give you that instead of multiple inheritance, and maybe you'll. Honestly, I believe that's one of the biggest things we could do. The problem was getting the languages to do anything with it. And certain language designers felt strongly that it was an inappropriate thing to do to their language and wouldn't implement it. So why put it in the base if the languages won't,
They didn't like type erasure to start with either, though.
That's right. They're learning, right?
Yeah,
Lambda expressions, right?
Any contrary opinions on that? Anybody think it's kind of not great thing to do? No? Everybody's for it. Okay. And then new stuff.
They're giving them ammo here.
Yeah. New namespaces in Rotor was the other thing. In general, our philosophy with Rotor is tracking the ECMA standard, and so we did rev the ECMA standard for 2.0, and we added a handful of libraries, system collections, the generics we added. Help me out, Jim. What else?
That's mostly it. There were some smaller ones that were used to support C# internals, and a little bit of reflection for generics.
So basically, whatever ECMA standardized, we're gonna do that much. So, yep.
Easy question for you, and I missed the first bit of the session, so cut me off if this is covered, but is there any kind of a roadmap for immutable fields on types? So you could look at a big composed type and say that's immutable and then do all sorts of optimizations on it, like in the CLR?
We already have, and have had since version 1.0, a notion of an init-only type. So you get to write it once in the initialization, and that's there and has been supported.
And then in instances of that, you could say this whole object, this instance of this
No,
object.
so it turns out that one, if you look, we actually look quite carefully at that. Even languages like C++ that have the notion of const allow you to cast it away. So there is no such thing at runtime. So supporting it in the runtime as an annotation would be sort of a joke. It would be an advisory to people using this, please don't allow anybody to mutate it, but your compiler can't take advantage of it. And we just decided that was more misleading than beneficial.
Maybe even a compile time immutable attribute, so we could
do that. You know,
I guess.
Then you look at C++, you have, why didn't they do that? And actually they have a very good rationale that's explained quite well why you never actually want that. And so lacking that, you don't get anything out of the JIT compiler's benefit, and it would have been nice. We really did look at it.
There's certainly places we'd use it if we had it, but it's hard.
I'm gonna give the. I'm supposed to give contrary.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm gonna say, and because I like this idea, and remember I'm the guy who's been working hard about thinking about how to get constant objects burned into the image. I would like nothing better than if we had some way of enforcing immutability throughout the system, because it would help me with the programming model and creating an opportunity for me to talk about truly constant objects, which in turn gives me an opportunity to share those objects across processes or across app domains at the very least. And I've got nothing now. And while I don't disagree with any of the analysis that Jim did just there, because he's spot on in terms of what the languages do and what we can actually infer, I would very much like there to be a mechanism where you could define such a thing, an init once thing. And I even proposed a couple and even implemented a couple. But the complexities in terms of what happens when one of these objects gets shared out to the world and they're not expecting a constant-only object, and what if I took that object and protected it and put it in truly read-only memory, they try to write to it, they get a general protection fault. There were lots of programming model complexities. So I don't know that I'm going to say no to you, but on a future-looking from a future-looking perspective, I'd really like to think more about that problem and see what we could do that people could understand that would let us do this sharing, because I really would love to do the sharing and get those optimizations in.
An interesting opening coming up. The previous session we talked about dynamic and scripting languages. If we really move heavily into that arena, where the expectation is today's expectation is we don't want runtime exceptions, we want compile time errors, right? That's the whole idea of strongly typing things. And a lot of why you didn't want these const things is that they actually give you runtime errors. So if we're going to a mode where a larger number of users are expecting to use dynamic languages, where they are expecting to get runtime errors and it's not considered a problem, and you're not going to come back and complain to me that I'm getting runtime exceptions, right, all the time from trying to mutate your constant objects, and then it might make a right compromise to actually enforce it at runtime.
Isn't it a total irony that the way that I might get my const immutable objects is by the presence of dynamic languages?
I didn't want to say it quite that straight out.
It's one more reason why I'll have to thank Jim. Let's all thank Jim together.
We're coming close to the end of the time here. Why don't we just kind of rip through the last three? Maybe we can give some quick rapid-fire answers to them. See how well that works.
That's a rapid-fire answer, guys. The number of CLRs that can run on the desktop rapidly approaches 2. There's a lot of pressure to be able, for a host to be able to spin up a particular version of CLR, knock it down, bring up another version of CLR for a different purpose. Any thoughts on reducing the stickiness of CLR in the process?
Do you want the ability to load multiple CLRs in the same process?
Not at the same time. I just want to be able to take it out
Serializing
and
by
load
the
it
got
at a
it.
different time.
Okay.
In the same process.
What's the scenario for that?
Developer tools.
For development tools? I see. To load them back up. Yeah, we haven't really done a lot of work to try and do that.
Okay.
I mean, it's just work. You could go make it work. But,
Right. Second question is, what sort of feature things would require a binary change to CLR version 3? A lot of stuff is going on that's running on CLR 2, and that's great. but what sort of things do you foresee might require a binary break?
I mean, examples are things like, like it would have to be a generics kind of thing, right? Where, the pervasiveness of it throughout the entire, the instructions, the metadata, and everything else would force it to break. I don't know if we have anything specifically on track for that. I'm not aware. Nothing pops to mind. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're doing with dynamic languages, we may, wind up instructions or things like that as well. Maybe that will wind up forcing something similar. We don't have a precise list. Anybody else can't think of anything?
And we want to avoid that.
You do want to avoid it. I mean, it was a really hard decision to do it with generics. It was such a compelling value add that we had to go do it.
As I said also, we try to reduce the innovation, the externally visible innovation deep down. And if we can do something without adding instructions, adding libraries instead, then we'll do that.
Okay, next.
Hello. We all know that, my first question is in the area of backwards compatibility. We all know that Microsoft is putting a lot of effort to make sure that our 1.x applications are running in 2.0 well, and you're even helping us with your own test labs and all. For those of us who are kind of passing on that opportunity, could you maybe disclose the secret and tell us which part of CLR gave you the hardest time, and maybe the areas that we should look out for?
In fact, there is Jesse Kaplan is right down the hall, actually, with the CLR 2.0 compatibility lab. You can, after this talk, walk right down there and try your code out. Just give them a plug. I think and I actually did, I went to Atlanta myself with the guys, and then we went basically all over, India and Asia and, all over the world, actually, trying to track down apps. The most common problems that we kept running into were like XHTML compliance and ASP.NET. They turned that flag on. A lot of people weren't expecting it, and it blew the code out of the water. We did find various issues, like one of the ones that I helped debug was a couple of breaking changes in XML file formatting for the SOAP promoter, things like that. And inevitably what happens is we bring them back, triage them, and try and undo the ones. We actually undid a whole bunch of changes that were inadvertently breaking to try and pull that back in. That's the kind of stuff that we were seeing. At our level down in the engine, we were seeing things around like we made it deterministic on how we initialize COM in a process, and that confused some folks. The WinForms folks in the framework libraries started to enforce the fact that when you created a control in one app domain, you couldn't invoke it from another because they had issues there. So when you add those the deterministic checks in there and people were relying on shaky behavior, that's the kind of stuff that we would see.
One of the ones that I found kind of interesting was...
You convert the old fashioned generics, is that like in the dictionary when you have the key that was not found, the old, like the hash table returns file and the new one throws exception. It's very hard to track down because I converted my software like 3 months ago and still from time to time get those exceptions because it's an exception condition, and I'm not sure that it was the right decision.
So it's not a binary breaking change, but we did have a chance to re-examine the collection library when we created the generic collections, and we made a handful of very kind of well-argued decisions, and we can talk about that one in more depth, but there's a handful of them.
Well, so I just wanted to express the hope that you guys are going to put some I don't know, something about this in the release notes or whatever it belongs.
It's actually on MSDN already.
Okay.
Every breaking change that we know of, all of them, 100% catalog, are up on MSDN. You can go download them. And we've been looking at trying, I believe, to get an FX cop rule that would allow you to, in your code, intersect the known breaking changes with the source code you have to help you kind of like, look. We take them all very, very seriously.
Okay, I'm sorry. What am I got to give?
Yeah, just real quick, a second question. I'm not even sure if it belongs to this audience. The iDisposable interface and its pattern of its implementation. We big fans, obviously, of your presentations, Brad, and I made our development department to watch one of your presentations on memory management. And when I asked these developers who actually watched it, did you find it interesting? And blah, they were all impressed. But one thing, when I asked further, how do you implement iDisposable? they'd be like, okay, we need to watch it again. So I was wondering if there could be something added to the base library, or I don't know, CLR, wherever, to make it somewhat easier and more native. It's not that you really need to implement disposable very often, but guys, if I'm disposed, then I do this, and if I'm disposing versus when I'm not disposing, and suppress finalization and all that.
We've made progress on, in particular in 2.0. I mean, why do people dispose, right? And the only good answer to that should be, oh, I have some native resources that I need to get, get properly managed. And we made progress. We have safe handles. We have a lot now. We have a lot more wrapped OS resources that are automatically implementing themselves the dispose pattern, so you don't have to. So instead of embedding a int Peter for a handle, now you use a safe handle. Safe handle is a managed object that itself will implement the dispose pattern, and you are free then to just ignore that and you remove your dispose. So the dispose is a very hard problem. What we are trying to do is make the hard problem being ours and not yours. Okay. So if that should be the only reason why you have to implement dispose.
So if I'm dependent on like third-party objects that do expose the dispose method, my current preferences I always call the dispose method, right? Using the statement.
Right.
But that part has to belong somewhere. It may logically belong to my implementation of the dispose method, and so again,
certainly there's
design pattern for it is somewhat.
Certainly there's going to have to be some bridging work to get where Patrick's saying with the safe handles, but that's sort of our.
But because you have to dispose some of your references doesn't mean that you have to implement the dispose, right? It's kind of the end of your transaction, right? When you write something, say, oh, I'm using something, and you say using, for example, using doesn't make you implement dispose. So the recommendation, very hard recommendation, is you don't implement dispose.
Yeah.
You dispose your references, fine, but the usage of dispose is a lot easier, right, than the implementing, as you said, right? So people usually get, oh, I have to dispose my object.
Yes.
But when they have to implement it, okay, that's another story. So my point is that you should implement less and less and use, a safe handle which you dispose.
All right. So last question to wrap us up here.
This should be simple, yes or no question. In my framework, I use aspects and I implement them through context-bound objects by hooking in before and after the method calls. Someone in the Microsoft team yesterday said I shouldn't be doing that anymore. Is that mechanism going away?
The context-bound objects. Is context-bound objects going away?
No.
Okay.
It rolls back to the compatibility thing that we just talked about before. Where
we'd break all kinds of stuff if we did that, right? I mean, there'd be stuff all over the floor. It'd be ugly.
Okay, so I just want to, is there any one piece of advice you can give people to write better managed code? Kind of, anyone?
Measure.
Measure. All right. Well, we will wrap with that. Thanks a lot. We appreciate your feedback.